The room was silent, except for the creak of old wooden benches and the shuffle of nervous feet. A courtroom in a small American town, where sunbeams cut through the high windows, dust floating in the light like memories of things people wanted to forget. The bailiff's voice broke the stillness. "All rise." Everyone stood as the judge entered, robes flowing, eyes sharp as steel. The gavel struck. Case 2417, the clerk called. United States vs. Samuel Hayes. At the defendant's table sat a man in his late 60s. His hands were calloused, his shoulders broad but weighed down by years of something heavier than age. He wore a plain, worn suit. His hair, mostly gray, carried streaks of black like fading shadows of a soldier's past. This was Samuel Hayes, once a soldier, now just a man on trial. The courtroom was packed. People whispered, curious. They knew Hayes as the quiet old man who ran the auto shop on Main Street. But today, the town knew him differently, charged with assault after an altercation outside a bar where he had intervened to stop a group of men from harassing a woman. But that wasn't what made the trial tense. What made it electric was the judge himself, Judge Richard Fallon. A man known for his sharp tongue and ruthless standards. And he already seemed to have a personal grudge against Hayes. "Mr. Hayes," Judge Fallon began, leaning forward. His voice echoed. "You stand accused of violence. Some might call it recklessness. Others might call it," he paused, letting the words hang in the air like a blade, "cowardice." The courtroom gasped. Hayes did not flinch. His face was carved from stone, unreadable. But inside him, memories stirred. A desert sky. The sound of rotor blades. Screams and fire. Men lost. Names etched forever into silence. He sat there quietly, refusing to rise to the bait. "Coward," Fallon repeated. "That's what you were then. That's what you are now." The gallery whispered louder now. "Coward." What history was the judge pointing at? Hayes finally lifted his eyes. His gaze locked on Fallon's, calm but cutting. Slowly, deliberately, he leaned forward. And in a voice so soft only the judge could hear, he whispered a single word. "A call sign. Raven 1. The judge froze. His hand tightened on the gavel. His face drained of color. The courtroom didn't know what had been said. But they saw something no one had ever seen before. Judge Fallon shaken, his jaw slack, his eyes blinking rapidly as if he had just seen a ghost. For the first time in his career, Fallon had no words. The silence in that courtroom was no longer just silence. It was heavy, sacred. And then, the story began to unfold. Years ago, in the unforgiving sands of Afghanistan, a classified mission had gone wrong. A helicopter shot down, a squad pinned under relentless fire. The commander had called for evacuation, but the odds were impossible. That was when a pilot known only by his call sign, Raven 1, defied orders. He swooped in under enemy fire, alone, with a bird that was never meant to survive such a run. Against all logic, against every calculation of survival, he saved them. Pulled men out of fire and dust, carrying them back to life. But the mission was buried under secrecy. Records sealed. Official reports scrubbed. The world never knew the name behind Raven 1. But Fallon knew. Because he had been there. He was one of the men Hayes had saved. And now, decades later, in a courtroom where Fallon sat as judge and Hayes stood as accused, their past collided like thunder. Fallon's eyes glistened as memories he had locked away came crashing back. The heat of the desert. The pounding of his own heart when he thought he'd never see another dawn. And then, the shadow of a chopper, the roar of salvation, and the faceless pilot who had risked everything. That faceless pilot was now sitting before him. The man he had just called a coward was the reason he was alive. But Hayes wasn't interested in recognition. He hadn't whispered the call sign to shame Fallon. He whispered it to remind him of truth, of sacrifice, of the things people forget when they sit on high thrones of judgment. The courtroom waited. Fallon tried to steady himself. His voice trembled when he finally spoke. Case dismissed. The gavel struck. Gasps filled the room. Whispers turned into stunned silence. Hayes simply stood, nodded once, and walked out without a word. But the story didn't end there. Outside the courthouse, the air was heavy with curiosity. Reporters gathered, microphones extended. The woman Hayes had defended that night stood silently, tears in her eyes. She knew there was more to this man than an arrest record. Fallon remained behind the bench long after everyone left. He sat alone, staring at his hands, remembering the blood and dirt of another life. He had built a career on judgment, but today he had been judged by the quiet strength of a man who carried more courage in silence than Fallon had ever carried in words. And that whisper, "Raven 1, would echo in his heart forever. The legend of Samuel Hayes spread quietly through the town. He never spoke of his past, never claimed his title, never sought glory. He simply went back to his auto shop, fixing engines with the same steady hands that once gripped helicopter controls under fire. But those who knew, those who had been in that courtroom, would never forget the day an old veteran silenced to judge, not with anger, not with pride, but with the truth of who he was. A hero. A man who carried the weight of others' lives without ever asking for thanks. And sometimes, the loudest roar of courage is spoken in the softest whisper. So, if you're watching this right now, take a moment to think about the veterans who walk among us. Men and women who carry stories we may never hear, sacrifices we may never see. The quiet strength of those who live not for recognition, but for the simple dignity of having done their duty. And remember, sometimes the ones you call weak are the very ones who carried you through fire. If this story touched your heart, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. Because stories like these remind us of what true courage really means.